Okay, it's time to fix Marvel Snap once again. Let's get into the FAUXTA. Now, after my last FAUXTA, I had Glenn Jones on to critique it, so I'm going to be trying to apply some of the lessons learned from that conversation to this one. With that in mind, please remember to like and subscribe if you enjoy this kind of content. It helps me keep it coming. We're going to start with Star-Lord Master of the Sun. I have Star-Lord Master of the Sun losing 2 points of power, and I worry that I've middled this to a point that everyone is going to get mad at me. But my basic contention is that I want Star-Lord Master of the Sun to be a card that is more about the payoff and less about just being good on its own. A lot of the strength of the deck, weirdly, comes from its ability to have this card be a pretty big guy, and I think making the card be less of a big guy is a meaningful change, even if you are still getting a decent amount out of the ability here. Other people have suggested things like taking away its ability to gain power at all. I worry that this would be a little too drastic, but I would consider it on the table. My thought process is that of the options available to me, this is the one that is least likely to Mr. Fantastic First Steps him. The big thing that I took away was that I wanted to do something about this card, but I did not want to do anything that made people who purchased this card feel as though the card they purchased had been taken away from them. To me, that rules out things like going to 5 cost and taking off the extra power that he gains. I think that that is the directionally correct decision for Star-Lord. I think taking him to 4/3 makes him a notably weaker card, but doesn't take away much of the dream of the card. It's possible that more needs to be done here, but I do think that the biggest thing I want to do is hit his obvious power, and I also think that he's probably a little less over the top than people think. For example, this is a card that is going to be carried a lot by the other cards that you are allowed to play in a deck with him and use as payoff, and there is a nerf to one of those guys coming up as well. And that is to Fang Foom. I have him going to 7/10, and this is purely an aesthetic decision. I think if I was a little bit braver, I'd be doing something like 7/9 or 7/8. I wanted to maintain the feeling of Fang Foom being a big body that was doing some fire breath, and I think the double digits on him is relatively important to that. Largely, this card is the card that I think is carrying Star-Lord decks more than any other card that isn't Star-Lord. This is the card that is the game-winning, slam this card down, you are going to win this lane kind of guy. And I think that it is pretty clear that a lot of his power comes from his, I guess, quote-unquote, fire breath of absorbing the power of the cards in front of him, and that 7 energy isn't as much of a downside as you would otherwise expect it to be, thanks to what Star-Lord is able to do. Now, I don't think going to 8 energy is a good solution because it just takes him out of anything that would be playing him with Electro or whatever and makes him only a Star-Lord card, which is not actually how he is right now. But I think this card has largely become Big Shang-Chi, and that's probably not a healthy thing to have around. I could see doing a couple of other things here. The first is capping his reward, say maybe at plus 12. He can only gain 12 points of power for it. I think that is another way they could do it, but it's a little bit harsher. My thought process would be hit Star-Lord, hit Fang Foom, take a couple points of power out of the deck, see if it manages to hold up when its combo is a little bit weaker and when it has a little bit worse of an ability to gain priority into its combo, and then see where we're at. It's possible that both of these cards still will require more balance changes because of how well they work together. Next up is Sholo the Undying. I think I have to take an L on Sholo. I expected in the previous metagame for 5/6 and getting rid of the spells to be a meaningful hit to him. He is currently 5/6, and frankly, most things that are good with him aren't even playing Merlin anymore, and I do think that that means that I was too nice to this guy. It's possible that I'm still being too nice to this guy. Again, a lot of my thought process around these cards is the thing I want to avoid the absolute most is a Mr. Fantastic First Steps. I was very affected by the reaction that people had to a card like that going from something that was very good to something that is very bad. But I also think that means that maybe there's not as much room to do slow rolling on Sholo as there otherwise would be, because the longer this guy is allowed to sort of cement himself in people's minds as what he is, the harder it's going to be if and when something drastic actually has to happen to him. Now, I think people are going to talk about, what about 5/9+2? I'll be honest, I think 5/9+2 is better than the card that I'm putting on the board right here. I would be willing to go down to 5/4 on this before giving up on the +3. But I think anything lower than that, we are talking about going to like 5/7+2 and saying that this guy was extremely, extremely way off. Now, why am I nerfing Sholo? Well, because unlike with Star-Lord, who I do think is meaningfully counterable, if you want to go out of your way and beat the guy, you can. I don't think there's a lot of good solutions to Sholo. He just ends up sitting on top of whatever mid-range deck develops by either hybridizing himself in or just generally having more points than them. And that's probably a really bad thing. He's also notably difficult to interact with in a way that Star-Lord is not. That is the biggest thing that bothers me about the card. There's not nearly as much you can do about a turn 6 Sholo, but there's so much you can do about a turn 5 Star-Lord. And the biggest reason for this is that cards like Supergiant and Daredevil specifically work on turn 5. So when you're playing against a Star-Lord deck, they're usually going to do turn 4 Star-Lord, turn 5 some stuff that duplicates the Star-Lord, and taking them off of that is relatively easier. Whereas this is happening on turn 6. There aren't ways to target your Cosmo on turn 6. There is no Supergiant for turn 6. This card's duplication is happening late enough that there just aren't necessarily going to be ways to interact with it in a meaningful way. And I consider him a much more serious problem in that vein than Star-Lord, even though Star-Lord's numbers or the things he is doing are probably bigger. They're more easily dealt with by other people playing cards. Sholo's problem to me is that there just isn't really a good solution to him. In fact, he's uniquely good against the card that is typically a solution to green power, that being Shadow King, because he's distributing that power. You can play priority really well, throw priority there, or even just do something like put a Cosmo in the lane that the target for the Sholo is going on to. Tons of stuff that is easily abusable with this card. I think you could argue going to 5/4. I want to start slowly ticking him down, but I'd be very willing to 5/4 this guy. Batroc the Leaper to 1/0. Now, I think this might be a high infinite thing. I'm not really sure how far this is percolated down, but it's been pretty clear for a little bit now that the Batroc shell is really messed up. And so I think this is step one of just tuning it down a little bit. I think it's very clear if you look at Batroc and you look at approximately every other 1-drop in the game, or really even some 2-drop scalers, this guy's pretty out of line with what everything else is doing. Your other 1-drops are a 1/3 with some upside. Nightcrawler, for example, is going in multiple decks, including the Batroc deck, just for being a 1/3 that can move. Hydra Bob is a 1/3 with an extra point of power and an ability that is either an upside or a downside, depending on how you actually feel about it. This is a 1/10. This card is a 1/10. And it also not only is a 1/10 in just like it will have 10 points if you play it and Sam Wilson, it is an extra move proc for your Kraven. It is an extra move proc for your Hydra Stomper. It goes with your Silk. It gives you extra move procs that way. This is just a card that is flat out doing too many points for a 1-cost card. And the choice here for me is between 1/3+1 and 1/0+2. And that is a choice between, do I want to hit the floor of the deck or do I want to hit the ceiling of the deck? I've chosen to hit the floor here. I think either one is a particularly reasonable thing to do. I will play this card in this deck at either stat line. I genuinely do not care. This is a staple. This is the staple to end all staples. If you can take 2 points off a card and it is still a elite staple in the deck that it goes in, you do that every single time. That is my thought process here. I've talked a lot about how the specter of Mr. Fantastic First Steps hangs over the way I think they should treat these other cards that came out of season passes. The feeling of betrayal from the community after Mr. Fantastic First Steps probably was one of the most notable things that I felt, and I feel like it informs how I think about balance in a lot of different ways now. And the fact is that there are certain things that I think should be avoided, and gutting a season pass card, being too aggressive with them, I think is dramatically worse than not being aggressive enough. Just it is for many reasons, but the primary one being that it's very hard to go back and undo because the risk on it is pretty big. If you go back to the problematic version of the card, even if it's notably weaker, you actually just didn't solve anything. So this is, I think, a risk. Taking Mr. Fantastic back to 2 cost and saying, here, this guy's going to be around and you're going to have to sit there and be like, all right, am I going to play this guy? He's now at 2-0. Now, I think that this still is a card that has a chance of being bad. But what I want to express here is that I don't know if there's a lot of upside in doing this. And if Mr. Fantastic weren't a very specific pain point, I would probably not want to do this. And the reason I have chosen to go against some of the stuff that I feel like I've learned from my conversation with Glenn, like do things that actually make the game more fun, and I'm not sure Mr. Fantastic does, is specifically in deference to that feeling of betrayal in an attempt to address it. I am saying that I think it is better to say, look, we are going to try. When we make a mistake on a card like this, we are going to do our best to keep it a worthwhile purchase. And I think that promise is worth trying to deliver on, even if the risk is high. Because Mr. Fantastic is not a card that is a particularly fun card to have good. You don't really love seeing a bunch of Mr. Fantastics accrue value over the course of the game, and then you have to think about whatever the hell the final turn is going to be. This is a thing that people really hate about Star-Lord, who does it more, but it's the same kind of dynamic of like, here comes a bunch of BS. And I think that that is a risk of doing this with Mr. Fantastic, is that like we're already in a pretty combo heavy meta. We're already doing a lot of combo stuff. He is a card that will make Zombie Galacti better. He is a card that will make all sorts of these things just a much more meaningful deck, a much more meaningful threat. Decks that I don't think I really want to be a huge part of the metagame. And that kind of thing is risky. I wouldn't be doing it if Mr. Fantastic First Steps wasn't in the specific position that he's in. I wouldn't be doing it if the overall vibe right now wasn't sort of focused around a bunch of season pass cards, I think. But I do want this to happen because I think it's worth saying we are committing to not obliterating your season pass card. And I think that's what this would mean. These next two are at least a little bit tied together. I'm having Quinjet get a point of power back because I think that Quinjet getting that point of power off was kind of questionable at the time. And frankly, I think that Vhand not being very good right now gives you license to undo a nerf that affected other things than just Victoria Hand. At the time, I felt like this was a bit of a weird choice and they should have probably only done the Vhand thing. One of the things that I talked about with Glenn was like, one of the reasons he didn't like my Sholo change was that there were 2 changes attached to it and you can't really disentangle them from each other. And I think nerfing Vhand and Quinjet is actually pretty similar to that. It's 2 changes that happened in a quick piece of succession. And it's clear that something happened and that, oh, okay, well, we know the deck is way worse now. But I do think that it's probably one of those things that should have happened one at a time. And so this is my attempt at sort of rolling that back. And if I'm wrong, and this is what brings Vhand back, which I doubt, to be clear, because if you want my actual opinion on what changed for Vhand, it's that Sholo became such a big part of the meta, and the loss of Deafening Chord was really meaningful. To me, Vhand is a deck that thrives or doesn't thrive based entirely on its own ability to adapt to a metagame. If its tech cards aren't meaningfully interacting with the opponent, it's just not nearly as good of a deck. And Sholo is a card that doesn't get interacted with profitably by Shadow King well enough. Vhand is not a deck that is like doing multiple Cosmo lanes very well. That kind of thing is not exactly ideal for what Vhand is. Largely, it's also a deck that cares a lot about its own turn 5, so it's not really good into Star-Lord. You have to give things up in order to get that, as opposed to something like a Batroc deck, which doesn't really care about its turn 5 in the same way. Its scalers are down much earlier. Vhand wants to use turn 5 to copy a Vhand or to play Hood Misery. Like, its turn 5s are very often spoken for, so it doesn't get to adapt by putting in, like, Daredevil Cosmo for the Star-Lord decks either. A lot of things are going against Vhand. I feel like it's very safe to give Quinjet the point back. Part of the reason that Sholo has such a statistical dominance over other mid-range decks is other mid-range decks just don't really have a 5 that's close to that level. And I don't mean like a 5 that's on that level. I mean like a 5 that's close to that level, which is why I have Infinity Ultron going to 5/8. I think Infinity Ultron is a cool card. I think it is a nice card to have be one of the better generic cards in the game. I think it comes with interesting deck building incentives, and I think that there are cool things you can do with this card that make turn 6s dynamic and compelling, and I think that that is a good thing for the game. Largely, one of the things that Star-Lord and Sholo have shown is that when there's like a really obvious, oh, I'm gonna lose thing that's gonna happen to you, no one stays. People are willing to leave. And then eventually, it doesn't happen immediately, people are like, oh, okay, I get it. You Mr. Negative to me. I'm going to leave. That's fine. I think that making Infinity Ultron a good card is a blow against this. It is a card that inherently has some RNG involved, a card that outcomes are unknown with, and therefore will likely lead to more turn 6s rather than less, because you are often incentivized to say, well, surely they didn't get purple and red here, right? Now, this cuts both ways. For a good player, it's a lot easier to beat a card that isn't like this. Like, bluntly, if we assume that this and Sholo are the same power level, which they won't be, but if we assumed that they would be, it'd be better to play this, because this is a card that your opponent, A, won't know the outcome of, where Sholo is relatively predictable. There's a Maverick on the board. I wonder what's happening, right? If these cards have the same power level, if they're the same level of good in a magical world where we can say that, then you'd rather play the one where that dynamic is not at play. Flip that around, though, playing against it can be a little bit of a pain, and it's a little harder to manage your cubes against something like this, especially for a good player. I think that's an interesting dynamic to explore, and I think that it's a coin that comes with two sides. And I would frankly like to see the other side of the coin after a few months of it just being, oh, I'm dead to the thing they're definitely going to do. So let's at least see if we can be dead to some things that we don't know what they're going to do. That's why I want to buff Infinity Ultron to 5/8. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I have been KMBest. You have been phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one. Let me know what you think about this video in the comments. As always, it really helps me when you like and comment and subscribe on things. I will say I have no plans to get Glenn Jones back to critique this one. This is sort of my attempt to synthesize the previous videos. But let me know how you feel about this FAUXTA thing. Let me know if y'all enjoy it. I was thinking about maybe making it like a running series kind of thing and then getting someone to critique it every so often. It might not be a second dinner person every time, but it's the kind of thing that does seem kind of appealing to me, is like, oh, okay, let's see if we can add this as like a piece of content people enjoy watching. So let me know. As always, I've been KMBest. You've been phenomenal, and I'll see you in the next one.